A teacher's breaking point, Vivian Cole sat in the hospital waiting room, her fingers stained with acrylic paint she hadn't bothered to wash off after her evening art class. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly glow that matched the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Beside her, a stack of medical bills sat in a manila folder, each page a reminder of how quickly life could fall apart. Her younger brother Ethan, 24 years old and full of dreams about becoming a photographer, lay 3 floors above her, fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The experimental treatment his doctors recommended could save his life, but the cost was astronomical. Even with insurance, the remaining balance was more than Vivian would earn in 5 years of teaching. She'd already taken on extra tutoring jobs, sold her car, and moved into a tiny studio apartment. Nothing was enough. The hospital's billing department had started making calls about payment plans, their voices professionally sympathetic but ultimately inflexible. Money or no treatment. Those were her options. The auction of Fate the Riverside, medical charity. Auction wasn't the kind of event Vivian normally attended. Her best friend, Jasmine, worked as an event coordinator and had secured her a volunteer position serving champagne to wealthy donors. Vivian wore a borrowed black dress and uncomfortable heels, feeling like an imposter among women dripping in diamonds. The ballroom glittered with crystal, chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Doctors, philanthropists, and society elite mingled with practiced ease, discussing their latest donations with the casual air of people for whom money was infinite. Vivian balanced a tray of champagne flutes, weaving through the crowd with careful precision. She'd never been good at being invisible, but tonight she tried her best. These people lived in a different universe, one where medical bills weren't terrifying, and brothers didn't die because their sisters couldn't afford to save them. She was so focused on not spilling anything that she didn't see that man stepped backward into her path. The collision happened in slow motion. The tray tilted, champagne glasses tumbled through the air, and Vivian watched in horror as expensive crystal shattered across the marble floor. The crash silenced nearby conversations, heads turning to witness her humiliation. The cold doctor with warm eyes standing before her, now splattered with champagne, was the most striking man Vivian had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples and steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalogue everything in a single glance. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. She recognized him from the auction program. Dr. Nathaniel Cross, Chief of Cardiothorax Surgery at Riverside Medical Center. The man who performed miracles on failing hearts and rarely smiled. According to hospital gossip, Vivian's face burned with embarrassment as she dropped to her knees, frantically gathering broken glass. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I promise." "Stop." His voice was deep and commanding, but not unkind. "You'll cut yourself." Before she could protest, he knelt beside her, his expensive suit touching the champagne-soaked floor without hesitation. Up close, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the weariness that no amount of wealth could hide, and something else, something lonely. Their hands touched as they reached for the same piece of glass, and Vivian felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw surprise flicker across his normally impassive features. "Let me help," he said quietly, and together they cleaned up her disaster while the crowd watched and whispered. An unexpected investigation. Vivian assumed she'd never see Dr. Nathaniel Cross again after that night. She'd been wrong. 3 days later, she received a call requesting her presence at an address she recognized as one of the city's most exclusive residential buildings. The message had been brief and professional, signed by Nathaniel Cross's personal assistant. No explanation, just a time and place. Vivian almost didn't go, but curiosity and a strange sense of destiny pulled her to that gleaming high-rise with its marble lobby and doorman who looked at her modest clothing with barely concealed skepticism. The penthouse elevator required a keycard. The assistant, an efficient woman named Patricia, escorted her up 47 floors to a residence that occupied the entire top level. The view through floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. The city spread out below like a constellation of lights. Nathaniel stood by those windows, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He wore dark slacks and a white dress shirt with rolled sleeves, looking somehow more intimidating in casual clothes than he had in a tuxedo. "Miss Cole," he said without turning around. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," Vivian admitted. "Your message was cryptic." He turned then, and she saw that weariness again, deeper now. "I've taken the liberty of researching your situation. Forgive the intrusion, but I needed to understand who you were." Vivian's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Your brother, Ethan. Stage 3, leukemia. The experimental CAR T-cell therapy his oncologist recommended." Nathaniel's voice was clinical, reciting facts. "The treatment that insurance won't fully cover. The bills that are bankrupting you, despite your 3 jobs." Anger flared hot in Vivian's chest. "You had no right to investigate me. My life isn't your concern." "It could be," Nathaniel said, and something in his tone made her pause. "If you're willing to hear me out." The impossible proposal. Nathaniel gestured to a seating area with leather furniture that probably costs more than Vivian's yearly salary. She sat reluctantly, every instinct telling her to leave, but curiosity keeping her frozen in place. "My father is dying," Nathaniel began without preamble. "Advanced congestive heart failure. 6 months, maybe less. He built cross-medical industries from nothing, turned it into a healthcare empire worth billions." "I'm sorry," Vivian said automatically, though she didn't understand why he was telling her this. "Don't be..." Richard Cross is a difficult man who measures everything in terms of legacy and succession. His final wish, his condition for ensuring the family business stays intact, rather than being sold to corporate vultures, is that I marry before he dies. Vivian's eyebrows rose. "That's archaic. That's my father." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I was married once, 7 years ago. It ended badly. Since then, I've avoided romantic entanglements entirely. My work is my life. I have no interest in love, marriage, or family beyond what duty requires." "Then find someone who does," Vivian said. Confused about why she was here, Nathaniel leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "I need someone who understands this is business, not romance. Someone intelligent enough to maintain the illusion and desperate enough to honor our agreement. Someone who won't develop expectations or complications." Understanding dawned slowly, impossibly. "You want to hire a wife. I want to hire you specifically." Nathaniel pulled out a leather folder, setting it on the table between them. 1 year. You'll live here, attend family functions, present as my devoted spouse. In exchange, I'll personally oversee Ethan's treatment, covering every expense. You'll never see another medical bill. When the year ends and my father has passed, we'll divorce quietly. You'll receive a settlement of $5 million. Vivian's head spun. $5 million, Ethan's treatment fully covered. It was impossible, insane, too good to be true. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because when you looked at me in that ballroom, covered in champagne and humiliation, you still had dignity. Pride, you didn't grovel or make excuses. You met my eyes like an equal." Nathaniel's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "And because I researched you thoroughly, you're loyal, honest, and resilient. You won't fall in love with me, Miss Cole, because you're pragmatic enough to understand what this is." He slid the folder toward her. "There's one critical clause. This arrangement is strictly professional. No romantic involvement whatsoever. If either of us develops genuine feelings, the contract terminates immediately with no compensation." Vivian stared at the contract, her heart pounding. It was a devil's bargain. A year of living a lie. But Ethan would live. Her brilliant, creative, kind brother would have a chance at life. She thought of his pale face in that hospital bed, of the hope dying in his eyes every time another treatment failed. She thought of their parents, gone for 10 years now, and the promise she'd made to always protect him. "Where do I sign?" Vivian asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Nathaniel's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Relief perhaps, or maybe regret. He handed her an expensive pen, and Vivian Cole signed away a year of her life, never imagining how impossible some contracts were to keep, or how some feelings were too powerful to deny. The city lights glittered beyond the windows as she wrote her name in bold strokes, sealing an agreement that would change everything. Her life as Mrs. Nathaniel Cross began with the scratch of pen on paper and ended with a truth neither of them could have predicted. Some contracts the heart writes in secret, in defiance of every logical clause, and those are the ones that truly matter. Moving day into a gilded cage, Vivian stood in the master suite of Nathaniel's penthouse, surrounded by boxes containing her meager belongings. The room was 3 times the size of her entire former apartment, decorated in sophisticated grays and whites that screamed expensive interior designer. A king-sized bed dominated the space, and for a moment, panic seized her chest. "You'll have your own bedroom." Nathaniel's voice came from the doorway, as if reading her thoughts. "This is just for appearances when staff or family visit. Your actual suite is through here." He led her through a connecting door to an equally luxurious bedroom, done in soft blues and creams. French doors opened onto a private terrace with a view that made her breath catch. In the corner sat an easel and a complete set of professional art supplies. "You paint?" Nathaniel said simply, noticing her stunned expression. "I thought you might want a space to continue." It was the first genuinely kind gesture he'd made, and it caught Vivian off guard. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "We should establish ground rules," Nathaniel continued, his tone returning to businesslike efficiency. "Public spaces are performance zones. Private spaces allow honesty. We attend family dinners every Sunday, charity events as needed, and hospital functions quarterly. In public, we're affectionate. In private, we maintain appropriate distance." Vivian nodded, trying to memorize everything. "And Ethan's treatment begins Monday. I've consulted with the best oncology team in the country. He'll receive the CAR T-cell therapy at Riverside Medical Center under my personal supervision." Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. "He'll have the best care available, Vivian." "That's a promise, not a contract clause." The first performance at the Cross Estate's Sunday dinner at the Cross family estate was an exercise in controlled terror. The mansion sat on 20 acres of manicured grounds, a testament to old money and older traditions. Vivian wore a designer dress Nathaniel had selected, her hair professionally styled by someone named Antoine who'd appeared at the penthouse that morning. Richard Cross waited in the formal dining room, diminished by illness but still formidable. His wheelchair was positioned at the head of a table that could seat 20. Beside him sat Diana, Nathaniel's younger sister, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s who studied Vivian with undisguised curiosity. "So," Richard began, his voice still commanding despite its weakness, "my son finally brings home a woman. Tell me, Vivian, what makes you different from the parade of socialites who've tried to trap him?" Nathaniel's hand found Vivian's under the table, squeezing gently. A warning or encouragement, she couldn't tell. "I'm not trying to trap anyone," Vivian said honestly, meeting Richard's piercing gaze. "I'm an art teacher from Brooklyn. I paint watercolors and teach teenagers about perspective. Nathaniel and I met at the charity auction when I spilled champagne all over him." Diana laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension. "Oh, I like her already." "Did you really?" "All over his very expensive suit," Vivian confirmed, allowing herself a small smile. "Not my finest moment." Richard studied them both, his eyes missing nothing. "And you fell in love over broken glass and ruined clothing?" Nathaniel leaned forward, his thumb rubbing circles on Vivian's hand in a gesture that felt disturbingly real. "I fell in love with her honesty, with the way she looked at me like I was just a person, not Dr. Cross or the family heir. She saw me, father, really saw me." The words were scripted, practiced during their preparation sessions, but the way Nathaniel said them, the slight huskiness in his voice, made Vivian's heart skip. He was an excellent actor. Or was he acting at all? Ethan's treatment and unexpected compassion. Monday morning, Vivian accompanied Ethan to Riverside Medical Center. Her brother had been shocked by the sudden change in his treatment plan, suspicious of where the money came from, but too desperate to refuse. Nathaniel met them personally in the oncology wing, transformed from the man she'd had breakfast with into Dr. Cross, commanding and confident. He explained the treatment protocol to Ethan with patience and clarity, never condescending, always respectful. "Your sister tells me you're a photographer," Nathaniel said, reviewing Ethan's charts. "What do you like to shoot?" Ethan blinked, surprised by the personal question. "Street photography mostly. People in their natural moments. The beauty in ordinary life." "I'd like to see your work sometime," Nathaniel said, and it didn't sound like empty politeness. "After you're recovered, of course." The treatment began with careful monitoring. Vivian sat beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand as the modified cells entered his bloodstream, carrying hope and science in equal measure. She expected Nathaniel to leave, to return to his other patients and responsibilities. Instead, he stayed. For 3 hours, he sat across from them, occasionally checking monitors, but mostly just present. He told Ethan about his own younger years, before medical school, when he'd wanted to be a concert pianist. "My father said medicine was the family business," Nathaniel explained, his eyes distant. "Art was a hobby, not a legacy. So I put away childish dreams and became what was expected." "That's sad," Ethan said bluntly. "The medication making him honest. You shouldn't have to give up who you are." Nathaniel glanced at Vivian, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "No," he agreed quietly. "You shouldn't." The charity gala where masks slipped 2 weeks into their arrangement. Nathaniel and Vivian attended the annual Riverside Medical Foundation gala. Vivian wore a midnight blue gown that made her feel like someone else entirely. Nathaniel, devastating in a black tuxedo, kept his hand on her waist with possessive attentiveness. They moved through the crowd like they'd been doing this for years. Nathaniel introduced her to colleagues and donors, his voice warm with pride that felt increasingly genuine. Vivian smiled and made conversation, discovering she was better at this role than she'd expected. "Dance with me," Nathaniel murmured when the orchestra began playing. On the dance floor, surrounded by other couples but feeling utterly alone together, they moved in perfect synchronization. Nathaniel held her closer than necessary, one hand splayed across her back, the other cradling her hand against his chest. "You're trembling," he observed softly. "Your heart is racing," Vivian countered. Feeling it beneath her palm, they both knew they were crossing invisible lines, violating the spirit of their contract, even if not the letter. But neither pulled away. The music swelled around them, and Nathaniel looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Vivian," he began, his voice rough with something that sounded like need. "Don't," she whispered, even as she leaned closer. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." "Why not?" "Because we both know the rules. Because Ethan's treatment isn't finished. Because I can't afford to break this contract." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Because I'm already dangerously close to violating it." Nathaniel's grip on her tightened. "And if I told you I was, too?" The confession hung between them, dangerous and thrilling. Around them, other couples danced, oblivious to the private war being waged in the center of the ballroom. "Then we'd both be fools," Vivian said finally, "and we'd both lose everything." The song ended. Nathaniel released her slowly, reluctantly, and they returned to playing their parts. But something had fundamentally shifted, and they both knew there was no going back to the careful distance they'd maintained. Vulnerability in the late hours that night. Unable to sleep, Vivian found Nathaniel in his study. He sat at a grand piano in the corner, his fingers moving across the keys with surprising grace. The melody was melancholy and beautiful, full of longing. "I didn't know you still played," she said softly from the doorway. Nathaniel's hands stilled. "I don't usually. Haven't in years, but tonight, I couldn't help it." Vivian crossed the room, sitting beside him on the piano bench. "Play something for me." He did, choosing something classical and complex, his entire body focused on the music. Vivian watched his face, seeing emotion there that he never allowed in conversation. Passion, pain, yearning, all expressed through sound. When he finished, silence filled the study like a held breath. "Why did you really choose me?" Vivian asked, the truth this time, not the contract reasons. Nathaniel turned to face her, and in the dim light of the study, his carefully constructed walls crumbled. "Because when you looked at me in that ballroom, you saw a person, not a position. Because you needed saving, and for the first time in years, I wanted to be someone's hero. Because I was tired of being alone, even if I couldn't admit it." "Nathaniel," Vivian breathed, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. "And because," he continued, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Somewhere deep down, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement might become something real." The confession violated everything their contract stood for, but neither of them could deny it any longer. They were falling, had been falling since that first collision in the ballroom, and no amount of legal documents could stop it. Vivian leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "This is going to end badly." "Probably," Nathaniel agreed, "but right now, I find I don't care." They sat together in the quiet study, not quite touching but not quite apart, suspended between contract and connection, knowing that everything was about to change. The crisis that changed everything. 3 weeks into Ethan's treatment, Vivian's phone rang at 2 in the morning. The hospital. Those 2 words were enough to freeze her blood and send her scrambling for clothes. Ethan's body was rejecting the treatment. Severe cytokine release syndrome. His fever had spiked to dangerous levels, and his organs were beginning to shut down. Vivian arrived at the hospital to find Nathaniel already there, still in surgical scrubs from an emergency procedure. His face was grave as he took her hands. "I won't lie to you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "This is critical, but I've called in specialists from Boston and New York. We're going to fight this with everything we have." For the next 48 hours, Vivian lived in that hospital waiting room. She watched Nathaniel work with fierce determination, coordinating with teams of doctors, adjusting medications, making split-second decisions that held her brother's life in the balance. Diana arrived with food Vivian couldn't eat, and coffee she drank mechanically. Even Richard came, his wheelchair positioned beside Vivian's chair, his gnarled hand patting hers with surprising gentleness. "My son loves you," Richard said simply, watching Nathaniel through the ICU window. "I've known him 36 years, and I've never seen him fight like this for anyone." "It's his job," Vivian whispered, though her heart wanted desperately to believe otherwise. "No," Richard corrected. "This is personal. When you love someone, Vivian, you fight for them with everything you are. That's what he's doing." On the second night, when Ethan's fever finally broke and his vitals stabilized, Nathaniel emerged from the ICU, looking like he'd aged a decade. His eyes found Vivian immediately, and she saw relief flood his features. She crossed the waiting room in 3 strides and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Nathaniel held her tight, his hands trembling as they pressed against her back. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for saving him." "Always," Nathaniel murmured into her hair. "I'll always save the people you love." When Vivian pulled back to look at him, she saw tears on his cheeks. Dr. Nathaniel Cross, the man who prided himself on professional detachment, was crying. "I was terrified," he admitted roughly. "Not of losing a patient, but of failing you. Of watching you lose your brother and knowing I couldn't fix it." "But you did," Vivian said, cupping his face in her hands. "You saved him." Their foreheads touched, and in that hospital corridor, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and the smell of antiseptic thick in the air, Vivian knew she was completely, irrevocably, in love with her contract husband. Richard's confession and revelation, a week after Ethan's recovery began. Richard requested a family meeting at the estate. His health had declined noticeably, the strain of recent events taking its toll. He sat in the library, surrounded by his children, and the woman who'd become part of their family through legal fiction. "I need to tell you all something," Richard began, his voice weaker than Vivian had ever heard it. "A confession that's long overdue." Nathaniel tensed beside Vivian. Diana leaned forward, concerned. I've known from the beginning that your marriage was an arrangement, Richard said, looking directly at Nathaniel. Did you honestly think I built a medical empire without learning to read people? I saw through your contract the moment you announced your engagement. Vivian's blood turned to ice. Nathaniel's hand found hers, gripping tight. I knew, and I allowed it, Richard continued. Do you want to know why? Because I recognized what you couldn't see. That contract of yours was never about avoiding love, Nathaniel. It was about giving you permission to find it again. Diana gasped. Nathaniel sat frozen, his face pale. After Elizabeth left, you became a machine, Richard said, referring to Nathaniel's ex-wife. Brilliant, dedicated, but empty. Then I saw how you looked at Vivian at that first charity auction. I saw it before you even spoke to her. I saw life in your eyes for the first time in 7 years. You manipulated us, Nathaniel said, his voice tight with shock and something that might have been anger. I gave you an opportunity, Richard corrected gently. I used my resources to ensure Vivian would be at that event. I had connections investigate her background discreetly. When I learned about Ethan, about her character and strength, I knew she was exactly what you needed. Someone with her own walls to break down. Someone who wouldn't come to you seeking money or status. Vivian felt tears streaming down her face. You used my brother's illness. I created an opportunity for healing, Richard said, his eyes kind despite his words. For both of you. And that ridiculous clause about terminating the contract if feelings developed. Classic Nathaniel, trying to logic your way out of being human. He paused, struggling to catch his breath. Diana moved to help him, but he waved her away. Tell me, Richard said, looking at his son with penetrating clarity. Has it worked? Have you managed not to fall in love with her? The truth breaks free. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vivian could hear her own heart pounding, could feel Nathaniel's hand trembling in hers. No, Nathaniel said finally, his voice breaking. It hasn't worked at all. He turned to Vivian, and she saw everything in his grey eyes. Fear, hope, love, desperation. I've been in love with you since that night in the ballroom, he admitted. I've been in love with you through every scripted conversation, every carefully planned appearance, every moment we pretended this was just business. I've loved watching you paint on the terrace at sunrise. I've loved hearing you laugh with Ethan during his treatment. I've loved the way you challenge me, the way you see through my walls, the way you make me want to be better. Tears flowed freely down Vivian's face. The contract, she whispered. To hell with the contract, Nathaniel said fiercely. I wrote it because I was a coward. Because I'd been hurt and I thought I could protect myself with legal clauses and emotional distance. But you, Vivian Cole, you walked into my carefully controlled life and destroyed every defense I had. He stood, pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. According to our agreement, I'm supposed to confess these feelings and terminate our arrangement. I'm supposed to walk away and let you go. But I can't do it. I won't do it. Nathaniel, Vivian breathed, her heart soaring. I love you, he said, loud enough for his entire family to hear. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you fight for the people you care about. I love how you make me feel human again. I love you completely, impossibly, and I don't care what contract we signed. Diana was crying openly now. Richard watched with profound satisfaction. I love you, too, Vivian said, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back too long. I've been terrified to admit it. Terrified of losing Ethan's treatment, terrified of losing you. But I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Nathaniel Cross. Not Dr. Cross. Not the family heir, not the man in the contract. You, the person who plays piano at midnight, who stayed awake for 48 hours to save my brother, who looks at me like I matter. A real proposal for a real love. Nathaniel dropped to one knee right there in his father's library, in front of his stunned sister and satisfied father. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't the ring from the contract, he said, opening it to reveal a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds. I bought this 2 weeks ago, before I could admit to myself why. It's the color of your eyes in certain light. The color of the ocean in the painting you did last Sunday. Vivian's breath caught as he took her hand. Vivian Cole, I'm asking you to marry me again. For real this time. No contracts, no conditions, no emotional escape clauses. Just to people who are terrified and imperfect and desperately in love. Just a man who wants to spend his life making you happy, supporting your dreams, and being worthy of the incredible gift of your heart. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Not because you need medical care or money, but because you want to build a life with me. Because you love me as much as I love you. Vivian pulled him to his feet, throwing her arms around his neck. Yes, she said through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was nothing like the careful, performative ones they'd shared at public events. This was real and raw and full of promise. This was the kiss of two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and refused to let logic or contracts keep them apart. When they finally pulled apart, Diana was applauding. Richard was smiling with such satisfaction that Vivian couldn't help but laugh. You old schemer, Nathaniel said to his father, but there was affection in his voice. Someone had to save you from yourself, Richard replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm quite tired. Planning elaborate romantic manipulations is exhausting at my age. As Diana helped their father from the room, she whispered to Vivian, Welcome to the family. For real this time. Alone in the library, Nathaniel pulled Vivian close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. No more contracts, he murmured. No more pretending, Vivian agreed. Just us, Nathaniel said, building something real. And as they stood together in that room where their journey had truly begun, surrounded by books and moonlight and the weight of new promises, they both knew that some love stories start with the strangest agreements, but they end with the truest commitments of all.